Welcome to Hey Dancer, your semi-weekly dance podcast. I'm your host, Miller DeRay, and today I'm kicking off a two-parter. It's my first, a series, if you will. Is dance a sport? It's one of those debates maybe, or hot topics or conversations I feel like it's popping up a lot in the dance world. I hear teachers in class talk about it. I've seen it on social media, and it's, I don't know, just come up with dance friends of mine. And honestly, it might be kind of tricky, right? Because, that's why I'm doing this in two parts. There's a lot to cover. So here's the deal. Today, part one, I'm covering, yes, dance is a sport. Part two, next week, I'm going to flip it. No, it's not a sport, and bring you those arguments. I'm not picking sides yet. I'm just laying out fair points. At least I think they're fair. Stuff I think holds water on both ends. No editorializing, no personal hot takes, not until the end of part two anyway. That's when I'll share my thoughts, opinions, where I lean on this issue. Okay, first off, this whole thing hinges on one big question. But wait, I didn't tell you yet to rate and review the show. So please kindly take a moment wherever you're watching or listening. Oh my gosh, it really does help. Rate, review, follow, subscribe, like, share. I think this episode in particular will prove really beneficial to your dance fam, especially the youngins. So please share, pass along. Feel free to do that. Also, before I get to the big question, do you see how I keep the suspense going here? I just want to say that while this conversation is, I see, talked about a lot, I think it's magnified for me specifically because, as I've mentioned often, as someone who disappeared from dance for 3 freaking decades, I was slapped in the face with lots of new stuff about dance, the evolution of movement in class, the structure, how class is taught, but also terms in the industry. And this is just one example, sport. I didn't hear dance ever being referred to as a sport in the early 90s. When I did one singular dance competition, when I was on Star Search, which was a TV talent competition show, still never heard dance and sport in the same sentence. So that's definitely a change. Now, that's my personal experience. Inevitably, there will be somebody who's like, I danced in the 1940s, and we always call dance a sport. I'm just speaking for me and my journey. I never heard it. Hence my surprise in hearing it so much now and wanting to investigate further with this podcast. We are ready for the big question. What is a sport? Like, how do we define it? That's the heart of this debate or conversation or whatever you want to call it. Some say it's all about competition, sport, rules, scores, winners. Others say it's physical exertion, sweat, stamina, pushing your body. And yeah, there's wiggle room there, right? For now, for part one, let's think of a sport as how the Oxford Dictionary defines sport: an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or a team competes against another or others for entertainment. Or how dictionary.com defines sport as, quote, an athletic activity requiring skill or physical prowess. Now, it does not take a genius to figure out that dance obviously very much fits into those definitions of sport. When most people think of sports, they think of athletes, right? And that to me is at the core of this. Dancers are athletes, full stop. Dancers push their bodies in ways most people can't even dream of. It's not just grace or artistry, though obviously that is there too. It's raw athleticism, strength, agility, endurance, coordination, you name it, dancers have it in spades. That is not up for debate here. This is a fact. The real question is whether that athleticism plus everything else dance brings makes it a sport. Also, let's not forget the mental game. Dancers aren't just nailing moves, choreo. They're memorizing and dancing combinations down to the breath, down to the fraction of a beat, you know? And if you're dancing with a partner or in groups, you know, like in a performance, you're syncing with that person or team, often under crazy pressure, especially if it's a comp, and pushing through nerves, injuries, just to hit the stage, just to make the performance. It's that kind of discipline and headspace you see in athletes like tennis players or sprinters or boxers. That mental toughness is a huge piece of what makes something a sport. So, those are two arguments and proofs, really, that dance is a sport already, you know, early on here in the podcast. Athletes and the mental game. Okay, picture this. I love that saying. It reminds me of Sophia on the Golden Girls. Anyone know this? Picture it, okay? A dancer in the studio, hours deep into training, drenched in sweat, muscles screaming. Does that sound familiar? This is another huge argument. Dance demands intense physical conditioning. We're talking strength, endurance, flexibility, stuff that rivals other elite athletes like NFL players, Olympic swimmers, or marathon runners. Ballerinas, for example, are holding up to 10 times their body weight on their toes. And data backs that up. I wouldn't say it otherwise. From a 2021 study by Gorwa. That link is in the show notes below, by the way. Football players, they're hitting maybe 5 times their weight sprinting, but it's spread across their legs, not pinpointed like on their feet and toes, like ballerinas. Wrestlers, gymnasts, same deal, 4 or 5 times max, and it's not all on their feet. But it's not just ballerinas. Take breakdancers, those power moves like windmills or freezes. They're generating explosive strength and core stability that rivals gymnasts, holding their entire body weight on one arm or head for seconds at a time. Or hip hop dancers pulling off quick, sharp isolations, especially in today's time with exceedingly fast choreography and so much, hip hop, very bottom heavy, loading the knees, footwork, super intense. All of that demands insane coordination and stamina, matching what you'd see in a basketball player sprinting down the court. Or what about salsa or tango dancers? They're building endurance through hours of partner work, twisting and turning with precision under pressure. Dance is brutal, honestly, in a way that's kind of unreal. And the training, it's not just stretching in a leotard, as maybe some people might think. It's cross-training, it's conditioning, it's periodization to peak for performances, injury prevention drills. Sounds a lot like what pro athletes do, right? But here is where it gets interesting. Not all dance is the same. I'm not talking right now about styles, like ballet, tap, jazz, hip hop, salsa. I'm talking context and setting. Dance as an art form focused on expression and performance versus dance as a competitive activity. That's the line I think we've got to draw. If you take anything away from this podcast, that's the big one. Competitive dance, RE sport. All dance requires superhuman-like athleticism, no doubt, but competitive dance, that's teams or soloists hitting the stage, facing off, chasing scores, awards, trophies. That distinction matters. And this, from my experience, is why the yes, dance is a sport crowd leans hard on competitive dance to state their case. It's got judges, scoring, systems, structured events, all hallmarks of what we call sports. Think about those massive nationals where everyone's gunning for a trophy. It's not just art, it's a contest. To dig into this a little bit deeper, I reached out to my friend, Dr. Chelsea Parati, who has a wonderful dance podcast called Passion for Dance, which I actually was a guest on some time ago. That link will be below. Dr. Chelsea is a voice in the dance world with a lot of thoughts on this topic. I actually remember, quite a while ago, posting something on my stories about dance and sport, and I remembered obliquely, like somewhere deep in my memory, that she responded saying that dance could be a sport. So that is one of the reasons I thought to reach out to her and ask her to focus strictly on competitive dance. And here is what she said.
Dancers are athletes who put in the physical training and show very high levels of skill coordination and athleticism in performances when they compete against other dancers. And so while dance isn't always competitive, when it's done with a competitive structure and judging, it's a sport. Now, I also don't think that the sport aspects of dance are without challenges. It's inherently difficult to objectively evaluate art. But that doesn't mean competitive dance isn't a sport. It's just one where people will differ in opinion on what should score well. That's why there are so many different types of competitions and different opinions on the evaluation of our sport. That said, competitive dance fits the definition of sport: physically demanding, high coordination of skills, competing against one another for a ranking.
Dr. Chelsea is clearly pointing at that competitive edge, physicality plus head to head rankings. It's not flawless. Judging art is messy, which is something that I will very much go into in part two. But yeah, competitive dance for sure has that sporty DNA. Now let's zoom out a bit. What about stuff like figure skating, gymnastics, cheerleading? They're artistic, sure. Fancy glitzy costumes sometimes, music, performance vibes, but they're locked in as sports. Figure skating has, spins and jumps, and they're judged on so many attributes like that precision and execution of those really difficult technical skills. When I was a kid growing up, figure skating was my favorite sport in the Winter Olympics. And I remember there would be, and I don't know if it's still like this, but I'm guessing it is, there is that first round of scoring for artistic merit, and then the second round for the technical stuff. Same thing with gymnastics, although it's not the same with, the judges releasing scores one at a time, artistry versus technical or whatever it is. But you know what I mean. Their routines are scored down to the decimal, and the judges factor in all of their skills, their tricks. And each of those skills and tricks, by the way, have different tiers, different skill levels. And then artistry plays some role. Although I will say that I feel like the evolution of gymnastics has gotten more and more trick heavy and less artistic. That's my own personal gripe about it, because I loved when gymnastics had far more artistry, but that's another conversation. And what about cheerleading? They got the flipping, they got the stunts in nationals, for example. All three of those, right? Figure skating, gymnastics, and cheerleading mix art and athleticism, and nobody is arguing them out of the sports club. Competitive dance isn't any different, really. It just kind of makes you wonder why dance often gets the side eye, sometimes, doesn't it? I mean, you'll hear people say it's just a performance, or it's way too artistic to ever be a sport, especially in academic or funding circles. But when you see the physicality in competition, it's hard to ignore the overlap, right? Oh, and check this. Dance is popping up in places that scream sport. Breaking hit the Olympics in 2024, and it's not a fluke. You've got stuff like the World Dance Sport Federation running ballroom comps with strict rules and rankings. It's not just dance battles anymore in the studio or on the street. Dance is global, flexing that competitive edge on the world stage. Kind of hard to argue it's not a sport when it's got Olympic cred, right? And that brings me to something else I think is crucial, why it's so important to think of dance as a sport. It's about respect, sure, but it's also practical. Think colleges, grants, funds, scholarships. Dance should be on par with other sports, no question. Right now, tons of college dancers can't get athletic scholarships or the same benefits as, say, soccer or track athletes. Recognizing dance as a sport could unlock more funding for teams, better facilities, equal treatment on campus. It's not just bragging rights, it's about giving dancers the resources and opportunities they deserve. And it's also not just about the logistics, there's more to it. For dancers themselves, especially young, up-and-coming dancers, calling it a sport could really shift how they see their own grind. It's validation. You aren't an artist only sweating it out. You're an athlete owning a crazy tough field. That mental boost can fuel confidence, push you harder, even help with burnout. And for society, it flips the script. People stop seeing dance as that pretty thing on stage, and they start clocking it as a legit powerhouse of skill and grit, right up there with football or boxing, because language matters. It could mean more kids picking up dance, more diverse talent in the game, and honestly, a culture that finally gets how wild this whole world of dance is. So yeah, it's bigger than just funding. It's about identity and respect inside and out. Okay, here is where it gets really fun, at least for me, science and numbers. I love this part. There's this US Department of Labor study, ONET data, crunched by insuranceproviders.com, that ranks jobs by physical demands. Guess which job is number one? Yep, dancers. Not firefighters, not roofers, not NFL linebackers, dancers. They scored it on 5 metrics: stamina, explosive strength, flexibility, coordination, and trunk strength. Dancers hit 100 out of 100 in stamina, flexibility, and coordination, a 97 overall. That's higher than pro athletes in a bunch of fields. Choreographers even snagged number 7, crushing it in stamina and strength too. It's crazy, right? Now, I had actually dropped this data in an Instagram carousel not too long ago, and it kind of blew up. It got a lot of traction. And if you aren't following me on Instagram, I recommend you do. I do daily, twice daily dance content between carousels and reels, and I post on my stories every morning a fun dance poll or quiz, and it's where I am the most present, active, visible, and consistent, and all the things. So I highly recommend @BackToGreat. Follow me there. People went off in the comments. I've got screenshots here, so if you're only listening, you may want to check it out on YouTube or Spotify for the video. And here's what a few people said. @DancyNancy. Something to think about as we head into the hysteria of Super Bowl weekend, when the nation practically comes to a halt to watch these multimillionaire athletes play a game. Dancers are the best all-around athletes, but never receive the respect and compensation that traditional athletes do. @Corey and Field. And yet so many college dancers can't get athletic scholarships or the same benefits that other athletes get. @Hillary.Jaeger.7. Just recognize dance as a sport already. @Catitrol. And some people still say this is not a sport. As you can see, these comments prove that for a lot of people, this data screams sport. That is what they inferred from my carousel. I mean, I can't begrudge them. It's kind of hard to argue with 100 out of 100 stamina when you're outlasting a linebacker, right? One more thing. Dancers, the good ones, the top ones, the high-level ones, are never just winging it. They're deep into sports science, same as any athlete. Think nutrition plans to fuel those long rehearsals and performances, biomechanics to perfect a leap, recovery tricks like ice baths or PT or chiropractic or acupuncture, whatever, to stay in the game. It's not random, it's calculated, like a soccer player prepping for a match. That level of prep, to me at least, screams dance is a sport. So there we are. I did it. I got through it. That's the yes side for part 1. Dance as a sport. It's got the physical grind, the competitive juice when it's structured that way, the stats to back it up. Next time on part 2, we're going to flip it and we're going to defend why dance is not a sport. What pulls it much more toward art instead. No judgment yet. I'm just laying it out, letting you chew on it. So what do you think, by the way, dance fam? Was I fair on this? Hit me up on Instagram, as I mentioned, @BackToGreat. Leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching, or on Spotify if you're watching. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And if you found this podcast in any way informative, educational, entertaining, useful, productive for your dance life or someone in your dance fam, I'd be honored if you passed it along. Thank you so much for being here. It was great to have you. I'm always appreciative, and I'll see you next time.